Hey everybody, welcome to GuitarsOK, streaming from Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm your host, Mac. Please subscribe to the channel. This week, we were able to go out to Seth Lee Jones's guitar shop. He's a musician and a luthier here in the Tulsa area. We posted some other videos of him playing guitar live. Had some amazing footage, had some great comments. People were really loving the videos. We enjoy his playing. We hope everybody out there gets a chance to check it out. This week though, we focused more on his guitar repairs and building. So it was a great time that I had out there at the shop. We hope you enjoy this episode. So please subscribe, like, share, comment. Appreciate it. Thanks.
This is a really old art shop neck, and this is from like the golden era when they were making art shops. This is 1934. The 30s and 40s were some great years for art shop makers, particularly in New York, where this thing was built. And I made this new fingerboard for it, and these guitars were made by hand back then, so there's some discrepancy. And I made this fingerboard, it's perfect and straight because I used a joined face, and I made this thing, it's perfectly square. Well, the neck is not. There's a little dog-legged on one side and a little humped on the other, so I had to trim back some edge to meet up with my nice perfect fingerboard. And that left one side feeling a bit clubby or shouldered. One of the things that's a pitfall for new makers is that when they shape a neck, they get the radius on it and they stop right before the fingerboard and right before the center edge of the neck. So you get this feel that's kind of clubby or shouldered, and it can make it uncomfortable to play. So if you're going to carve something that's old like this, you got to make sure that you've rolled over these edges, because like I said, this neck was not perfect, being as old as it is. And making the fingerboard to fit it, you kind of split the difference on each side and then blend it together so that everybody is nice and comfortable to play. So this, to begin with, is an asymmetrical C. It's kind of more sloped on this side, which your hand is more sloped like that on that side, so that's fine. And then this side is a harder curve. But I wanted that edge to blend into the binding there so that it's not uncomfortable. And this was a really challenging project too. This guitar had a nasty neck set done by a shop in Arkansas probably 30 years ago. And this tongue, this is a cantilevered fretboard that just hangs over the top of the instrument like that, doesn't make contact with the instrument. And they had rested that on the surface of the guitar and warped it and warped the fingerboard. They destroyed both the fingerboard and the tongue. And you can see this has a scarf here, and it has this curved line that traverses down to the end of the head or the fingerboard here. That's a really complicated part to make, particularly on something that's as asymmetrical as a hand-carved neck from 70, 80 years ago. So it took me a while to figure out how to get that joint fitted and get it back together. And this neck had a steel stiffening bar in it, and in those days when they were putting steel rods in necks, they didn't glue them in. So the neck just moved around the steel bar. So what I did was I took the steel bar out, backfilled that with walnut, and then I carved my own channel for two 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch carbon fiber graphite rods to go in here. So now this neck is nice and sturdy, and it's got a brand new Amazon rosewood fingerboard on him with binding and block inlay that I did yesterday. So he'll be a beautiful thing. I've got all the original inlay that went on this headstock. I'm still kind of on the fence about putting it back because it's pretty crude. Like I said, in the 30s they didn't have CNC machines. They were carving all this stuff out like coping saws, and and this isn't a particularly valuable instrument. An unmolested one's probably worth somewhere around $1,500 to $2,000. So if I do something, anything I want on a headstock, it's not going to really hurt the value of it. But the rest of the box that goes to it is cello grade figured maple. It's on the back and side. It's got a really deep carve on it, wonderful recarve. And then the top is Adirondack spruce, which that grade and that tightness of figure was over harvested in the 50s. So what's on it is really hard to come by. It'll make a really nice sounding guitar. And you know, I probably won't get my money back as far as how much labor I've got into this, but it's a good story.
I love it.
I've had this
That's
as
great.
a personal project for 13 years. And, it's just been sitting in some state of disassembled for
Can
eons.
I feel the neck?
Yeah. I'm not quite done. The
Shoulder
first
even.
position there's kind of got a bit of shoulder left on it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I know. I see what you're talking about. You split the difference between the two sides.
Right? Yeah. So this side was hanging over in the middle, and this side was pretty even, but he was hanging over at the end. Yeah.
It was nice now.
Yeah, I got a little ways to go up front, but it's getting there. Yeah, Amazon rosewood and then the pearl block that I did yesterday. This is stacked celluloid binding that's on the sides here. That's what would have went on this originally. That's what I took off of it. It was really thin stuff though. And celluloid back then was super unstable, and they get what's called binding rot, particularly Gretches. For some reason, Gretsch was buying from somebody that wasn't really making a whole lot of great celluloid, and a lot of that stuff just crumbles and falls apart. So this newer stuff is more durable. They've got the science figured out now. But yeah, it's a fun little project.
Does Gretsch still make them like this?
I believe Gretsch is owned by Fender now.
Right.
Everything's been translated into CNC. I believe at this time that this was made, this was a contract white label build by another maker in New York. So there's several people that could have been the author of this thing, but it's definitely not Gretsch per se. That was kind of common practice in those days, to have somebody make your parts and then brand them yourself. It actually still is today. Believe it or not, Trussarts are actually Warmoth neck instruments. Valley Arts for a long time was all Warmoth stuff before they got sold to the Japanese. And then, you know, Valco, National, Supro, those were all made by the same entities. There was a company called Stewart that made some guitars. I've got one in the house, a really rare one called an Orophonic. And they were Harmony Bantam bodies without the F-hole and Gibson 125 necks that were sold to them. Gibson did a thing with the P100 before the advent of the P90 where they come up with this pickup, made thousands of these damn things, and then decided, we don't like these, we like this P90 because it's easier to produce. Hey Harmony, you want these P100s? We'll sell them to you super cheap. So the Kleenex box pickup that's in all those Harmonies of that era, they're actually Gibson P100s.
No way.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I got into doing this work. My first job when I was 15, I had just picked up guitar. And my first job was working for a guy who was a master furniture maker. And he did some home remodeling. And he hired me in the summertime to help him with some furniture projects that he had and do some remodels on some medical buildings, particularly one that did, you know, custom shoes for people with feet issues. But it dawned on me while I was working for him that, you know, hey, these guitars are made out of wood. This guy knows how to make stuff out of wood. Let's try to make a guitar. So we tried, and it sucked. But that's where you get started. I made a box drum for my dad that he still has. But yeah, that was really what got me the bug to make things out of wood. And I tinkered with it until I went to school for it, and been operating professionally since 2006. So that's what's been going on. It's a journey, though. I mean, you gotta love it. You don't have to go to school for it. I know guys that are really good makers that didn't go to school, but I know a lot of folks that did go to school that are talented, and they had better direction to get there. When I went, I ended up doing an apprenticeship with the guy who wrote the curriculum for another 5.5 years, and I worked for several other shops in between. I worked for Ron Thorne Custom Inlay for a little bit. He's now the head of the custom shop for Fender.
Wow.
He was a really neat guy to work under, and I worked for Neil Moser for a little bit. He made all those BC Rich Bitch and the Seagull, and I was part of the side of the shop that was doing resto, so they'd hand me a pack of razor blades and some 1970s BC Rich and be like, see you in 8 hours. Not a really fun gig. I only did that for about 6 months.
Where was that?
That was in Los Angeles, up Glendale area. Worked for Mike Peters for a little bit. He was a classical guitar maker over by the airport near LAX. And, I worked for Fred Askin. He's one of the premier restoration people in the LA Basin. He's a fantastic restoration guy, really, really detail oriented, and killer guitar player. He went to MI for the GIT program back in the 80s, I believe. Monster guitar player. Just knock your socks off. But yeah, I think, taking a lot of different perspectives, just like we were talking about, taking lessons from a lot of different people, reading a lot of different books, different perspectives, because some stuff's going to work for you and it's going to not work for somebody else. So getting a lot of different takes on the same thing. There's a million ways to skin this cat of guitar making and guitar playing, and there's really not a whole lot of a rule book for guitar playing as there is for guitar making. But man, there's some freaky stuff going on in the building world now. People making guitars out of reclaimed materials and composite materials, and flax seed, and whatever else they can press together to make an instrument out of. But I come up with that idea of watching a whole bunch of YouTube videos and hanging out with people like Fran Askin and John Carruthers, people who think differently, think creatively about how to get a problem solved. So those are the things that are not going to come out of a StewMac book. But getting started, a StewMac book and a kit is a great place to start, and you could probably start somewhere between $300 and $500. Anybody can make a body. You can buy a pre-made neck and make a body. A body is a two-dimensional part, and there's only one part of it that has to be perfect, and that's a neck pocket. And the only part of that has to be perfect is the depth of it. If it's a little sloppy side to side, big deal, it's still going to work. A body is just the thing that all the stuff bolts to. So as long as the things fit in the holes, you're good. So I think a good starting point is making a body, because that's going to get you comfortable with a router, and it's a good blast off point for woodworking to make a two-dimensional part, and then screw a neck to it. It gets a little more complicated when you start making the neck. All these slots have to be within was it 0.0002. They have this thing called tolerance stack. So if I'm off a little bit here, it's going to be a lot over here. So that the fretboard scaling has to be super accurate, or the instrument's just never going to play in tune. And the carving of the neck, that's something it's very artistic and feel based. You got to know what you like to feel, and then know how to get there. And then laying out for where the tuners are going to sit for straight string pull and all that. There's a lot of drafting that goes into making a neck. And that fixture for doing the truss rods, that's a massive fixture. It took me, 3-4 days to make that. And the curve, if you're going to do a compression truss rod, which I prefer because it's really the best way to do it, curve is 170 inches, asymmetrical. I'll show you what it looks like. That's what it looks like. So that rod's not in there straight. It's got that curve in it, and it compresses the neck. It backbows the neck to fight the pull of the strings. And that's what keeps that neck straight. So in a neck like this, I've got carbon in it, and it just needs to be straight, and that's all you need it to do is just stay straight. And there's two different kinds of leveling for frets. That would be this one as opposed to the other. But making a neck, that's really where the hard ball is. If you could make a neck, that's something. Anybody can make a body. It's a great place to start. And where I started was even dumb it down even further than that. I made a lap steel, and I made it out of the most primitive stuff. I wish I had a picture of it. We did some just as a joke one weekend, I had my buddy Frank, God bless him, he's passed on, but we were in here, him hawing around, and it just kind of became a bet. I bet you make a lap steel out of something in here. I was like, yeah, I'll hold my beer, and I grabbed a 2x4, and we made a lap steel in about an hour out of the 2x4, and it worked. You know, you don't have to start making a Stradivarius. You know what I mean? Just start making something, or start tinkering. That's where I started. Really, I was taking my Squire apart and putting different parts on it. You know, I used to go to yard sales, and back in the '90s, all these like Harmony guitars that are worth a bunch of money because Jack White touched one.
Yes.
I used to buy those things for like 15, 20 bucks and take them home and just gut them. Just parts all over my bed. Just pick parts out of one and slap them on another. I had all these Frankenstein together. Just Ry Cooder would have been in heaven looking at that stuff, There's gold foils on this and Tysco pickups on that. Just junk into junk. But it's fun. It gets you started. And it's addicting, really.
So is there a school still around here for it?
No, there's not a school around here. There's a school up north of Red Wing. There's Gallup that's in Arizona, I believe. The program that I went to, the GCA program, doesn't exist in Hollywood anymore where I went, but they have one in Nashville. There's some schools on the East Coast, but there's not really anything in Oklahoma. I was teaching a class at Tulsa Wood Arts for about 4.5 years, and we produced somewhere beyond 225 instruments, something like that, in that program in 4.5 years. And it was really the best deal you could have got. You built a Telecaster and you walked away with was the equivalent of a $1,200 guitar, and the cost of the class was $750. And if you missed it, I'm sorry, because that was the best deal in town to build your own Telecaster. I mean, we had a $80,000 spray booth that was built for motorcycles, way overbuilt for what I was doing. We were spraying nitro finishes in there and just killing it, man. Made some really great guitars out of there. And it's funny, one of the guys that took my program actually went to Red Wing afterwards, and he's got a repair business in Oklahoma City. I believe his name is Tyler Huskinson or something. But yeah, some people get bit by the bug, and some people just want to build their dream guitar. When I went to Musicians Institute, out of class of 30, only 7 of us actually graduated.
Wow.
And the funny part about that is even if you didn't graduate, you still could get a job at Fender or ESP or Schecter putting strings on stuff. When you work at a factory line job, you really don't get to do anything cool. Mm-hmm. And you have a quota for how many of the uncool things you have to do before the end of the day or you're fired. So factory line job, working for Fender, boring. I wouldn't do it, unless I got hired for something cool like the custom shop. But you can't really work your way up from the pit of stringing up Guitar Center guitars to the custom shop. You know what I mean? Yeah. I got knowledge from working for people who produce parts for other people, like John. John made parts for all kinds of makers in the Bay Area, including Bill Asher. At one time, we made all the Asher necks in Carruthers' house, in his house shop. But he made parts and did restoration. It wasn't this factory line thing where you're just like 1 cookie, 2 cookie, 3 cookie. It's like we got to work on whatever came in the door plus whatever he was going to make that year. He made somewhere around 100 instruments a year or something like that, sometimes more. So you got to see from the ground up the process instead of you're the neck guy, you put the thing on the neck. Like that's how they run a shop like Fender. It's like they build Model Ts in there. They're not. And some people might argue this with me, but when you get to that level of production, you're not really making instruments anymore. You're making units. Sure, the custom shop guys are producing some really nice stuff, and they have more control over what they're making as far as it being artistic and being an instrument. But when you're talking about the 3,556 American Standard off the line, that thing is sterile. It's just another unit, and those are perfectly playable instruments, and you can customize them to make them you. But it's just another Strat.
So if somebody came to you, like myself, walking in and says, "I'm just getting back into guitars. I
need to get a guitar made. I like S styles. I like Strat style, right? So, what type of budget does it cost for a guy? And I know there's lots of variables depending on what they play and all that stuff. But what would go through your mind walking in the door saying, "I want to hire you to make me a guitar"? Where does that process start? Do you have me play? Do you have me tell
Well,
you?
I mean, generally folks have an idea of what they want. Um, it ranges from 2,600 to 36. I'm sure we could make it more expensive than that, but it all depends on the material and the hardware that goes into it. So like, there's some stuff that I have dealer status with that I can get, and there's other stuff that I can't because I'm just a small guy. I'm one guy in this little building with help every now and then. So it would just depend on what kind of wood we were using for both the neck and the body, and whose pickups and hardware we're using. If it's something that I'm already a dealer for, then yes, the price is going to go that way. If it's something that I'm not a dealer for, it goes the other way. So it just depends on what they wanted, and the paint too. Like if somebody's like, "Hey, I just want a natural finish, hand rubbed, oil finish," it would be not a big deal, But if they want it to look like a bass boat with the big sparkles, which I can do, there's just more money in process and labor. It just depends on how fancy or unfancy you want to make it. Yeah, they're getting me too. It's probably about my extended warranty on my car.
Hey, if your car breaks down, don't call me to help you because you've been offered an extended warranty.
That's right. I always tell them when they call me about that, I'm like, "Yeah, I got a 1986 C20 square body long bed. You want to give me a warranty for that?"
They're like, "What? Is it 3 on the tree?" Then you're
No, it's right out there.
Yeah. All right. So here's another question for you. So take like a Strat style HSS roasted maple neck, right? Not a super fancy paint job. Something of that nature. What, like, you're running stuff and your head's already cooking right now. I can see it. Like,
Yeah.
So you're already cooking. Like, okay, well, let's run with that for a minute because that's kind of like what I'm looking for. So I'm just going with what my example is down the road. So if a guy like me walks in and says, "I want an S style HSS roasted maple," what?
Oh, if it had the Goto 1088 on it, probably 2850. If I put a Vega on it, it'd probably bump it to 32.
Nice.
Or Callahan, something like that, because I don't get any break on either of those parts, and those are $300 bridges, So
depending on, see, that's the.
It just depends on the part. If you didn't care that it was a Goto 1088, which is a fine bridge, they're hardened saddles. It's a really nice bridge. I've used those for 2 decades.
What type of material is that?
They're steel.
Stainless steel.
It's got hardened steel saddles and a cold rolled steel block. And they make a lot of aftermarket parts for them too, so you can get an aftermarket block for it. It's a really modifiable bridge. It's a great standard platform that a lot of builders have used for probably 30 years. It's a great bridge, but I get that through all parts. I'm a dealer. I'm not a Vega dealer, so.
What about like the humbucker and the HSSs? What type of ones would come to mind to put in something like that?
I've been using the Surge stuff lately.
That's interesting.
And
yeah.
Oddly enough, people think of Doug Aldrich as this metal player. His Doug Aldrich pickups, those things are awesome, man. That is a great example of a PAF, and they're not terribly expensive. They're not Lawler money. They're, the Surge. They're reasonably priced. I think they're like $140, $139 a piece.
Really?
They're not bad.
And it's more like a PAF, pickups. Are you saying? Is it?
Yeah.
More, so in patent.
Good clarity, great output, but not so hot that it's just angry.
Yeah.
They're really good pickups. I had a guy bring a guitar in and have me take those out and put something else in. I was like, "What are you doing? Why are you taking these out of here? These are way better than what you're having me put in."
Did you happen to keep them? Because I could put them in.
I didn't.
Get back to them.
Yeah.
So let's talk single coils for a second, because like my guitar's Mexican.
Well, it depends.
It's noiseless, but I'm not happy with it.
A true vintage sound, there's really 2 people that I really like for the spot on vintage tone. Novak, and then more recently I bought a set of the Klein Epic 61s, killer. And I had a 61 here that I had borrowed from Larry Schaefer, and they nailed it. I mean, they were the only company that I saw online that was making a set of pickups that were spec to that era that had mismatched outputs. And that was one of the things I noticed about that 61 that was here, is that front pickup was actually the one that was hotter than the two. And they were all different. You know, some of these makers, they put out these pickups and like each coil is the exact same number. It's like that inconsistency is what makes the sound. And
right.
when we measured the magnets on the Gauss meter, they were all over the place on the 61. They were like, you know, one magnet would be 780 and the one next to it would be 1400. You know, it was just crazy, different each magnet.
So explain to a viewer what you're talking about with as far as a magnet. You're talking about the one.
The magnet itself would be the aluminum, nickel, cobalt, iron pole piece that you
Pole
see, the
piece,
6 dots.
Yes.
Those magnets, if they're all consistently gaussed, that's not going to be in truth for what a real Stratocaster is. You know, back in those days, they didn't have a whole lot of science behind it. They wound pickups and they threw them in a bucket, and you're building a Strat, you grab 3 of them out of the bucket. You know what I mean? And the guys making the magnets probably somewhere around the same deal. It's like, oh, we'll put this much in there and this much in there, and we'll make a whole bunch of these little guys, and then we ship them out. And they all come in a box. You know, they weren't like measuring these things so specifically that they become dissected to the point where they are now, where you know, some of these vintagey pickups kind of become sterile, and that they've been overdiagnosed with what should be a vintage pickup.
So raw vintage, you know, guys, like that's exotic guitars, all that Mountain LA.
Yeah, that's some good stuff.
Yeah.
You know, put it in perspective. Like the Seymour SSL, it's a great pickup, but do I believe it? Listening to it as a vintage Strat pickup, absolutely not. It's a good pickup, but to my ear, I don't think 1964 Stratocaster when I hear a Seymour Duncan SSL. I just don't. The Kleins, those guys have got that figured out, and so does Novak. You know, and there's some other guys that are really good at that. If you're wanting to go something more modern, I've got a G&L that I have loaded with the DiMarzio, the original pickup that Yngwie was using. What was it? I can't remember the name of it. I'll remember it when it doesn't matter. But I've got 2 of those single coils, and they sound real stratty, and there's no noise at all. Great pickup. I've got that paired with some blade pickup that they made, a Tone Zone or something, at a single coil size. That's a great sounding guitar. You do all the rock sounds and no noise or buzz. The other company I really like is Kinman. I believe they're in Australia. They make some really killer noiseless Strat pickups. Myself, what I run in my white telly is the Tim McNeely pickups, but that's kind of specific to what I'm doing with the white telly. I've got giant strings on it. It's tuned to open D. Got the benders on there. So he was the only guy I could find that would make me a dual blade Telecaster bridge pickup that was flat, because I have no radius on the fingerboard of my telly.
Really?
Anything that I make for myself that's for slide doesn't have a radius. The bar is flat, so I make the fingerboard flat. That means all my action's going to be super even all the way across the board. You put it on a 7 1/4 and try to play slide with it, the outer strings are going to be real high because the fingerboard's real round, you know. So that's why I did it that way. But he was the only guy that would make me a totally flat, dual-bladed bridge pickup for a telly. And as far as I know, he's the only guy that makes a pickup of that nature that when you split it, it's still noise canceling. I have no idea how he got around that roadblock, but he did. And then the neck pickup is a stagger swagger, and as far as I can tell, there's a coil up here and a coil down here. I'm not sure if they go all the way through, but you see 3 poles and 3 poles staggered apart like a P-bass, but it's in a humbucker cover. And that has been my favorite setup for probably, I don't know, maybe 10 years now.
It's on your neck, the neck.
Yeah.
On the telly.
Yeah, that's just the go-to if I'm building a telly with benders. That's what I recommend. People don't always take my recommendation, but that's my favorite, is that set of pickups.
That's interesting. So when you switched to like open tunings and all that stuff years ago, did you have to switch your pickups, you think? Like, if I was to go from a standard buy a second guitar with open tunings, I'm only going to play an open, would you prefer, other than the slide aspect, you know? But
I'm of the school of thought that, you know, when I was anytime somebody asks me about getting into playing slide, I'm like, find the cheapest harmony you can find and just put a set of 12s on it.
Bang on.
Yeah, go for it. You don't have to change your pickups to play slide. That's just what I prefer with the bender.
Right.
I don't know. I feel like getting into playing slide is like one of those things that you can kind of halfway commit to it, and be functional. Particularly with open D. G is, for me anyway, has been difficult. I've got a guitar tuned to open G in there, and I suck at open G, man. It's just, for some reason, I can't wrap my head around that top string being what it is. So.
And tell the viewers what's that tuning then. That's
the tuning that I use is D, A, D, F sharp, A, D. I'd have to look at the paper to tell you what open G is. I just don't use it that much.
Got something to say. Hey, oh. Yeah. If you look deep down in there, that label there, that's me on a tricycle in about 1989. My dad did that artwork, and my buddy John turned it into a label for me. So this ring here is figured maple, and this binding is figured maple, and the rest of this guitar is made of mahogany. And until I run out of them, they're going to say the Dixie. When I run out of those, I'll have it say something else. But I've got about 6 or 7 more of those inlays, and I'm not going to waste them. This is my router table that I made. It's a Makita 3 1/4 horsepower, and I cut this by hand using a compass and punches, and then I drilled it and filed it until it looks like it's almost perfectly circle and machined. But it's not. It's made by some hillbilly in a shop behind his house. So this work area here is kind of a catch-all. A lot of these bodies are, if they're bagged up like this, there's bodies in here that are finished and painted and ready to go. They're just waiting for their necks. This is another neck that's just sitting over here. I've decided I want to pair it with that body. That's why I've set it over there. These are all my fingerboards. These are the fill strips going in the one-piece necks. So I cut them out using this one as a template. So they have to match that curve, and that gets pressed into the slot and glued in place. And this is all Amazon rosewood. I don't use Indian rosewood, not because I think it's a bad material. It's just because everybody uses that stuff. And it's kind of purpley, and it kind of limits what colors you can use. So this stuff is the closest you can get to Brazilian rosewood in color and form without breaking any laws. And it kind of ranges. You can see, like, that's really light, that's really dark. Some of this stuff has stripes in it, some of it doesn't. And it's all beautifully quarter sawn and really, really stable. And that's why I use it. It's not crazy expensive, but it's not as cheap as Indian rosewood. Indian rosewood's a really cheap wood. I don't really care for the tap tone of it. Some people do, but I'm not a fan. Yeah, down here I've got body blanks, and then underneath the body blanks are tops. There's really not a lot of body blanks right now. I'm in the process of running necks, but the blanks, when they get cut out, they look like that for a while, and then I put holes in them. And the neck blanks are actually up here in the rafters. If you look up there, I've got 40 of those master grade maple necks in stock right now, as far as the blanks go. So when I get them in these big packs. This is what they look like before I cut them out. When I get a body blank, it comes as a 10 or 12 foot board that's 15 inches wide if it's mahogany, or 8 to 10 inches wide if it's alder or sugar pine. So those, when they come in the door, I cut them to length and then put them away. These, maple doesn't grow around here, and none of our suppliers in Oklahoma carry good maple. They used to, but not anymore. Yeah, all this work gets done in this little 420 square foot building.